right. Well, Dr. Peterson, thank you so much for joining me today. Thanks even more for all that you've done for Army women's basketball from the very start. And as you know, I've got several questions for you, and let's just get started.
Okay.
So Dr. Peterson, in general, tell me your thoughts about West Point and starting a women's basketball program at West Point. How were you involved, and what was your role?
All right. Well, with regard to the first part of your question about West Point, I love West Point. I respect what it does. I admire, by and large, most of the staff, and I thought it was a real honor of my life to teach there for almost 20 years. When the time came for admission to women to West Point, I had several irons in the fire. One, I had taught and worked with women my entire life. I was on the board, the executive board or the board of advisors for the Women's Sports Foundation. My wife was going to be the first woman instructor at West Point, and I had an affinity to make sure that it worked. It was damn well time for Congress to do the right thing, which was to pull the dragging, complaining senior corps of the Army into the reality world, and they did that with the women. I had taught women's PE in my life, and I generally I knew what I thought. I thought I was fairly informed about the physical capabilities of women, and I certainly had my opinions about what would make it work and what would not make it work. I knew how dogmatic the men were. I mean, what the hell, you had the general at West Point complaining about the fact that women were coming to West Point. I mean, this was the general. People were going to take their lead off of him, and he was complaining about it. But one of the things that was part of the program was they were going to start a athletic program for women, and the call had been for the first sport to be basketball. Where their idea about basketball was Iowa basketball, 6-on-6 with 3 on each side. With their plan was to contact Art Schafter and Marks, the clothiers, to outfit the women, and they didn't really have a plan. They just knew that they wanted to, in my opinion, all of this is just my opinion, they just wanted to glorify what they were doing so that they wouldn't get any negative blowback. Well, I had strong opinions about it, and I told them, in my opinion, and I was proven right, frankly, that women's basketball team would probably be the most important undertaking that would occur with regard to the admission of women to West Point. Women were going to be admitted on July 1, 2000, no, excuse me, 1996, I guess. And they basically had no concept or earthly idea. I'm talking about they being the senior leadership at West Point. I didn't think they had an earthly idea about what was really involved in that in terms of getting men to accept them and getting women to feel good about themselves. So I went to my boss, Colonel Jim Anderson at the DP, and I said, if it's all right with you, I'd like to take the leadership on this and make sure we get a good coach, make sure we have a decent schedule, and God forbid playing something other than Hart, Schefter, and Marks uniforms. He said, fine. So I started looking into it. Well, the biggest reason I wanted the women's basketball program to start, other than the fact that I wanted women to feel good about themselves, my personal opinion was men would never even begin to accept women as part of the corps unless they were under the perception that West Point was going to treat them about the way they treated the men, which was crummy, crappy, and whatever you wanted to think about. And they had to kind of prove themselves. Well, you can't legislate attitude. You have to gain it through experience, in my opinion. And I believe that to be true. And we went about the business of putting everything together. There was no money whatsoever. The cadet activities fund later came across with some money. The athletic department was Neanderthal, thinking they had to worry about themselves and they weren't going to worry about women until later when they figured out how they could take advantage of it, in my opinion. So basically, my wife and I went about the business with coming up with a program. The very first thing you had to do is we had to get a coach. Can't do anything without a coach. There's no money for a coach. I looked into it, and Mike Krzyzewski, who was the head men's basketball coach at West Point at the time, he had X number of people assigned to him. Unfortunately for the women, one of the things he had was he had one too many people. And I asked him who that person was, and it was a gentleman named Denny Van Fossen. Perfect. I mean, he was a sergeant in the Army, being paid by the military. I went and talked to him, told him what I was thinking about, and he willingly signed on and turned out to be an absolutely perfect choice. The next thing we had to do is we had to come up with a schedule. I did that. I scheduled the first game against Skidmore College in Albany because I knew a senior member of their staff. And although I didn't know a whole lot about Skidmore, I didn't think we were actually bringing in the Boston Celtics play Army. I didn't have a clue if we were going to win or not. I wanted to be competitive, blah, blah, blah. The next thing I did was once I did the schedule, I found a coach and I figured out what uniforms we were going to wear. I determined that if we're going to have a successful program, success was going to be determined by things like butts in the seat, word of mouth, the typical kinds of things that are associated with marketing. I contacted my close friend, Bill Gill, who was the lead sports writer of the local newspaper for the Mid-Hudson Valley, and asked him if he would help me, and he did. And he started hyping the fact that women were going to play basketball, and women were finally admitted to the academy, and women were going to start playing basketball. Well, the very first game was against Skidmore. Now you got to remember now, we only had freshmen. We didn't have anybody but freshmen. And we had kind of a limited number of people. I think we had a couple of people on the team that didn't actually play in high school. But Van Fossen was a good coach, and he understood fundamentals, and he was a great guy, and he was very patient, and he worked with them. So the first game came, and the gym was packed with male cadets and kind of curious, interested faculty members. You couldn't have gotten anybody else into the gym. And I'm kind of an old softy, romantic kind of guy. So I decided the women were going to enter the gym under the strains of the Eagles song "New Kid in Town" because that's what the women were. And so we played that before every women's game, and we called the women's team the Sugar Smacks. I didn't want to be associated with a dumbass men's team that Krzyzewski coached because they were awful. I wanted this to be a separate entity. So they came out, much to my chagrin, but probably not too surprising. The male cadets, who were basically operating under a general who didn't want the women to be there, and it didn't hide his opinion, didn't hide his opinions at all. They supported the Skidmore. every time that the women came, they were basically there to see what kind of what the women looked like and whatever. And their statement at the beginning was, we don't. Basically, their attitude, perceived attitude, was we're not. We're for Skidmore, and they cheered Skidmore during the warm-ups and when they came out. And they didn't boo the women's team; they just didn't cheer. So the game started, and about 2 minutes into the game, a seminal moment occurred during the game that showed me that I was right about the women's basketball program. Loose ball, Skidmore woman squatted down like she was going to take a leap to pick up the ball, and she got hit simultaneously by two Army women's basketball players. I can't remember the other one, but one was Christy Stevens, who was the biggest and toughest player on the team. And they knocked her ass head over Tico, about 20 feet away. And there was like a pause in the attitude. And from then on, the male cadets actually started cheering the women cadets because they were finally under the right perception that these women are tough. This is not the men perceive themselves as being tougher than the men in local colleges. As soon as they saw this, they went, "What the hell's going on here? These are the same women they get mistreated by upperclassmen. They get abused by the system, and these women are tough. I mean, I'm happy to be associated with them." And they, from that moment on, and it grew exponentially as we took specific steps to make it grow. The men's acceptance to the women. Now, women at the time probably had no idea that this was occurring because they got abused from every side. I mean, everybody was abusing them. You know, the men didn't want to sit next to them in classrooms during class. But campus-wide, the interest in the game started to exponentially grow. Probably the part of it that I enjoyed the most was parents started bringing their younger daughters to the game so they could see what women really could do. It was amazing. We had lots of little girls, and I think the women on the basketball team really appreciated the fact we probably had a sellout at every game, which means if you brought somebody else into the gym, somebody got kicked out someplace because there was no room. And with Bo Gill and a lot of volunteers, we created a lot of buzz. And I think we started the ball rolling on the fact that these women were, excuse the word, but they were shit kickers who belong there, and they deserved it. They deserved more than a minimal degree of respect from everybody, men, women, kids, and everybody. And it became kind of that first season became kind of a thing, frankly, to get into the game and go to the game. And I can't remember how that first season turned out. I probably could have done some remembering of the whole thing, but we had a pretty good year. We were like 15-5, and the 5 included losses to 2 or 3 4-year programs like Princeton. But we played schools. Part of it, we played schools in our area if we could. We played schools that first year. We played schools for eyewash, like Princeton and people like that. But we had a good season. And at the end of the year, if you had come to me and said, were your hopes realized, I would have said, damn right they were realized. In reality, I think they exceeded it because we had so momentum going into the second season, and it actually looked like we were going to be able to get some support and funding from other than the Sue and Jim Peterson bank account. Did have a lot of really good officers supporting us. We had a good staff, and I think all in all, West Point owes the women basketball team an unbelievable degree of gratitude because they did things that they hadn't even thought of. I mean, they couldn't think of it because they really, most of them are West Point grads. They have this glorified version of what life was like when they were cadets, and which probably had nothing to do with reality now. And they didn't think about what the real issues were. The real issue was figuring out how to make sure that women became an integral part of the process, and that there was a reasonable level of cohesion among male and female cadets. And to this day, I'm a firm believer that there was simply no way to make that happen without an athletic team. And there's simply no sport that would allow women to do that more than basketball. I mean, you think about it, you can't do it with softball. What the hell? There's never any contact. The volleyball, same thing. There's never any contact. Track and field, it's an individual sport. So we needed something where there was a demonstrable display of the toughness, mental toughness and physical toughness of the women against their opponents. And it turned out great. We had a bunch of great women on the team who worked their ass off. We had a staff of Ben Flotson. We had 2 or 3 military guys step up and become assistant coaches. And we had the typical things. And we had an officer in charge who kind of fended us off from most of the problems. But it may have been luck, but I tell you what, it was the exact thing that West Point needed at that moment.
So that's quite a story about how the West Point basketball team helped with the overall integration of women into West Point, and so that was the beginning, the start of basketball there. But after that first year, how were you involved in selecting the next coach and keeping that program going?
Well, Van Fossen was whatever you do when you get out of the Army. He was getting out of the Army, and I tried my best to talk him into staying, and I didn't know what the salary would be, but I said I will make a concerted effort to get Friends of Army women's basketball to contribute. And I said I knew that I could come up with a competitive salary for him, and he said that rightly so. He was married, had a family, and he didn't want to take a chance because he had just spent 4 years as an Army grunt, and he realized that life is not always fair. So we needed a coach. So I thought about that. Okay. Well, I'll talk about the coach, and now I'll talk about the process in a second. I said we needed a coach. I said my opinion was we needed a high school coach because we needed somebody who was grounded in fundamentals and was a good teacher. Well, as I said earlier, my good friend was Bo Gill, who was the local sports writer, and I contacted him, and over dinner one night I told him what my dilemma was. I said I need to figure out how to hire a good coach. Well, Bo Gill said to me, I got the perfect person for him. He's a local coach. He does great. His boys' teams kick ass and then some. Let me see if I can set you up with a meeting. And he set me up with a meeting at the coach of the local high school team called Marlboro High School. And Joe and I met for an hour one day, and it took me about 60 seconds to figure out this is the perfect guy. In the meantime, Colonel Anderson at the time, he'd set up a hiring committee, of which I was the chair of the committee, of 3 or 4 people. The only guy I remember is Bill Shutsky from the men's program. He was involved with the men's program. He was on the committee. Anyway, I met with Chappie and I decided this is the perfect guy. I told Chappie that I wanted to hire him, but I needed to go through some administrative steps. Unfortunately, I also told Bo Gill that we wanted to hire him and please keep it quiet until it happens. And he splashed it over in the headline in the local newspaper the next day. Well, I hadn't talked to Anderson and I hadn't talked to Shutsky. Shutsky didn't talk to me for about a year because he was so mad at me. People tend to get mad at me for being impulsive at times. That was all right with me. What I really worried about was the fact that, and he would have been okay doing it, and it would have been appropriate for Anderson to say, you don't understand what procedures are, and because you don't, you're no longer on the committee, and we're not going to hire Joe Champy. Whereas Anderson said, well, he basically scolded me, properly so. But he says, if you think Joe Champy is the guy, he's the guy. So we hired Joe Champy, and he came on board as soon as his Marlboro duties for the year were done, and he worked with us during the school year to help us, and we started getting organized. In the meantime, we had the first year ended, and the head of ODIA, the athletic department, a general named Ray Murphy, who had previously been the athletic director at West Point, was coming back for a new thing. He had figured out in his mind, and again, this is just my opinion, it's not official West Point doctrine, that if you put the women under the ODIA blanket, they could amortize a whole bunch of the expenses for both programs. I mean, the expense was going to be there whether women there or not, but what it did basically was gave him an opportunity in a venue to charge a women's basketball program for a whole bunch of the expenses that were going to be charged whether they did that or not. I don't think that the point I'm trying to make is, in my opinion, I honestly don't think at the time he cared. Bottom line is, ODI said they would take Champy and give him an office, and they would pay him, which was, and they would help any way that didn't bother him too much if they could. I told him we would still make this schedule. We would still do most of the things. All they had to do was pay Champy and help us whenever they could. Well, in addition to Champy, we wanted them to help us with they had an Office of Public Information. We wanted them to help us promote. And they assigned a woman member of ODIA information to help us, and she was quite helpful. I don't think they went out of their way, but she was quite helpful. And ODIA in its own way was helpful. At the time, we were having serious problems with ODIA because we were so successful in the men's basketball program was north of Horseshit. And there was certain people at West Point, primarily Krzyzewski, who seemed to be annoyed because we were successful and we were getting all the attention. And then his 5-15 or 5-20 men's basketball program wasn't very good. So the head of the sports information, the boss of the women that they gave us, he contacted me personally and told me that we needed to dial back our efforts to promote the women's basketball team because it was reflecting poorly on the men. As you well know, I'm fairly blunt when I want to be, and I gave him my blunt answer, which was, I'm going to do anything that is the best interest of West Point and the women. And frankly, if you want to fix this, the best way to fix it is make the men better. We're not going to help. We're not going to cut back on anything we could do to promote the women. And we're certainly not going to worry about the fact that the men basically can't compete at their level. That's their problem. That's not my problem. And we continued on, and we had a pretty good first year of champion, second year of the program. We scheduled. We had a trip to the Midwest where we played at the Indiana University team and then somebody else in the area. I can't remember. Primarily because of our commitment to your and Melinda's father and mother, that if they encouraged or at least allowed you to come to West Point, I would do my damnedest to make sure that there was a game in their area that they could come with their friends and be proud of who you were. And they weren't looking for any help. They would have driven you to West Point at 100 miles an hour if I'd asked them to. They were very good. They were very good. Anyway, we had a pretty good year. Now we were very competitive. Chappie turned out to be a fantastic coach, frankly. To talk anytime, as you can tell, I probably talk too much.
Not at all. This is great. This is great stuff.
But they're all relevant points. I mean, it occurred. It didn't occur in a vacuum. I mean, we just between you and me, since the camera's not rolling anymore, it's tough I knew it was tough to be a woman at West Point. So I was kind of conflicted. I wanted to shake the crap out of you and say, stop feeling sorry for yourselves and start realizing what an opportunity this is. If nothing else, the other women you're going to meet, but the fact that you were pioneers.
Yeah.
Being a pioneer is a pioneer. That doesn't mean it's a thing of glory. We were still dealing with crap from men at West Point, and my own faculty members were terrible. I mean, they were awful. Now, being the head of a whole bunch of work assignment committees and things like that, I was able to squash that yesterday because I just shit all over them if they shit on women. but this is not being filmed. But I mean, but the point was there was a lot of factors going into this, and I thought you were making West Point a much better place. I empathize with you because they were tough on you, but they were tough on all the women.
Yeah.
And I also wanted you to understand that stuff where you should reach a point in your life where you should have been and you should be extraordinarily proud of who you are and what you did. The hell with the fact that the system wasn't fair necessarily. It doesn't make any difference.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go back, would you really have traded all that for a degree from Indiana University? Hell no, you wouldn't. You wouldn't know the people you know now. You wouldn't. Frankly, you probably wouldn't be the person you've been and are now. I mean, you can't go through trial by fire. You can say they're screwing me every day of your life, but at some point you got to say, well, it was tough on me, but it's tough on all cadets, and it was.
Yeah.
It was tougher on you, I think. Sidney B. Berry was the guy. He was the goddamn general. He's the head of West Point, and he was bitching about women. And I sent something through the thing and said, you're making it impossible task. I'm trying to make the women good and proud of themselves and have an impact on the Corps. And you're kind of throwing out an excuse out there for them not to feel good about women because you didn't care for women. Well, goddamn it, Sidney B. You're fucking from Louisiana. Go back to Louisiana. You've got an obligation to the institution. And Sidney B. didn't see it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was incredible. It was an incredible time. It was awful at times.
Yeah.
But the guys, the faculty members, you got to remember all those guys Burks, and you know, they were all volunteers. The only guy getting paid was Champy,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
know, and that was fine. Just the way it was. Now, I couldn't remember. I remember the first name of the woman ODIA assistant who helped her. Her name was Maddie, Maddie. I couldn't remember. I still don't. I mean, I still don't remember her last name, but she was the ODIA assistant information assistant who helped us.
Oh,
I know that.
Maddie Sylvani, the
Yeah,
she kept
she
stats and assistant. Yeah,
well, she was the first promotional person from ODI to help
yeah,
anybody.
yeah.
It was the first time we got shit out of anybody other than paying Champy.
All right.
And they weren't paying Champy because they were women's rights. Yeah, because they were paying Champy for all the wrong reasons. I didn't give a shit as long as it didn't affect us anyplace else.
Yeah,
And I just wanted that money, so we got Champy. Because high school teachers make a reasonable amount of money.
yeah.
The only one other thing you need to ask me about was that Liz
Uh,
Cousins.
yeah, great.
You asked me about Liz Cousins, that whole process. I mean, it was an awful process for me personally because um, I thought it was going to destroy women's basketball momentum,
Yeah,
and it showed me that people on ODI particularly didn't give a rat's ass about what the women were or what I had done for them because they basically crapped all over me, which I didn't care. I mean, they get in line, you're going to crap on me. But they had done a terrible thing for women's basketball. And
yeah,
then the other thing that if you talk about seasons 2 and 3 with Champy, and then Champy leaving and why he left, I know why. I mean, I know why he left.
yeah, yeah.
And then they asked me about the Army's third coach, Liz Cousins.
Right.
Because I'd like to. She may be a nun now, but she's one of the worst human beings ever took a breath in my life
Yeah,
I had ever met, and I didn't understand it. Uh, but then I'll talk about hoops and heroes and the
yeah,
fact that we're supporting the project, and
yeah,
I mean, I still have a great affection for West Point and women. Some of my absolute best friends are West Point graduates. Some of my absolute best memories occurred at West Point, primarily the women's basketball program. And this is a project that I believe has served several purposes. And we'll just talk about what it is, what they are. But no.
perfect.
I, I've said a lot of what I could say or wanted to say, but no. Bottom line is the women basketball program was successful. It wasn't an accident. A lot of people worked real hard to make it occur. Uh, Jim Anderson certainly did.
Absolutely.
He could have cut us off any number of times. Uh, I believe that he was our cheerleader at the board. Whatever they call all those colonels, where they get together once a month or once a quarter and
Yeah,
tell each other how great they are.
yeah,
I think he, I think I think he was our cheerleader. He he explained to them in terms that they understood why and how the women's basketball program kind of fit into the whole scheme of things.
yeah,
And and to be honest with you, my wife did a lot. She was the first woman instructor,
yeah,
and she was smart,
yeah,
and she was gutsy, and she might not be as profane and profound as I am, but
yeah.
she's smarter than me, and she did what she needed to do to help make it work. And
All right.
I honestly believe that, in my opinion, and it's arrogant, but I honestly believe it wouldn't have happened quite as fast and maybe not as successful without her and me.
Well, yeah,
So,
and for her, her involvement was not just the basketball team. It was, it was
she,
all the women cadets.
oh yeah, and every time some senior committee had a question about something about the women, they drug her over there to
Yeah,
talk to her about it.
yeah,
She was the one that set the direction, and she's smart enough and she sounds intelligent enough because she is, that when they ask her, she had her shit together. So
Yeah.
she
Hey,